They buried her alive up to her neck, but he saved her when everyone thought she was dead. Amira was a young woman who lived in a small village surrounded by green fields and tall trees. Her house was modest but filled with warmth, laughter, and memories of generations that had lived there. Every morning, the sun would rise over the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, and Amira would start her day with a smile. She loved these simple moments, the sound of birds chirping, the cool breeze that touched her face, and the smell of fresh bread from the nearby bakery. Life in the village was peaceful, but everyone knew that even in the calmest places, trouble could quietly creep in. Amira had grown up in this village, and everyone who knew her described her as kind, caring, and generous. She had a heart that wanted to help everyone around her, from her elderly neighbors to the children playing in the dusty streets. People would often come to her for advice, or sometimes just for comfort, because Amira had a way of making others feel better without saying much. Her smile was gentle, and her eyes carried a quiet understanding that made people trust her immediately. Despite her cheerful nature, Amira was not naive. She knew that not everyone in the village had good intentions. There were always whispers behind closed doors, jealous glances, and subtle warnings that some people didn't like to see someone else succeed or be loved by everyone. But Amira tried not to think about those things too much. She believed that if she stayed honest and kind, good things would follow. And so she continued her daily life, helping, laughing, and living fully. Her mornings usually started with simple chores. She would sweep the floors, water the plants, and feed the small animals she kept in her backyard. The village was small, so every path was familiar to her. She knew every stone, every tree, and every friendly dog or cat that roamed the streets. Sometimes she would walk to the market to buy fresh vegetables and fruits. The market was always bustling, with vendors calling out their prices, children running around, and neighbors chatting happily. Amira enjoyed these trips. She would greet everyone, share a few jokes, and sometimes even help carry heavy baskets for the elderly. People in the village began to see her not just as a kind person, but as someone who made their community feel warmer and closer. Yet in her heart, Amira always felt a little tension, a feeling that something was not entirely right. She noticed how certain villagers would stare at her a little too long, how some would whisper when she passed by, and how a few people seemed to dislike the way others admired her. It was not enough to frighten her completely, but it was enough to make her wary. Sometimes she would tell herself that jealousy existed everywhere, and that she should continue being herself no matter what. Other times, she would quietly pray for protection and guidance, hoping that no harm would come her way. One particular morning, the sun was brighter than usual, and the sky was clearer. Amira decided to take a slightly longer path to the market, walking past fields of wheat and small streams that reflected the sunlight like tiny mirrors. She loved these walks because they gave her time to think, to dream, and to feel free. As she walked, she waved to a few farmers who were tending to their crops, and they waved back, smiling at her familiar face. Everything seemed ordinary, but the calmness of the morning hid the tension that was quietly building in the village. At the market, Amira met a few friends who were busy selling their goods. She bought fresh tomatoes, green herbs, and some soft bread. While she was picking her vegetables, she noticed a small crowd gathering near the edge of the market. Curious, she walked closer and saw that some villagers were talking in low voices, glancing at her occasionally. The words they were saying were difficult to understand, but the tone carried suspicion and resentment. Amira's heart sank slightly. She tried to focus on her shopping and not let their whispers bother her, but a small seed of worry had already been planted in her mind. After finishing her shopping, she decided to stop by her friend Fatima's house. Fatima was an older woman who lived alone and often shared stories from the past. She was like a grandmother figure to Amira. As Amira entered the small, cozy house, she could smell the aroma of fresh tea and warm bread. Fatima greeted her with a hug and offered her a seat. They talked about simple things at first: the weather, the market, and the news from neighboring villages. But soon the conversation turned to something more serious. "Amira," Fatima said, lowering her voice, "I hope you don't mind me saying this, but you must be careful. Not everyone in the village is happy with you." Amira looked at her, puzzled. "What do you mean?" Fatima sighed. "You know how people can be jealous. You are loved by many and some feel threatened by your kindness. I've heard whispers. Not everyone wants to see you succeed or be safe." Amira felt a chill run down her spine, but she tried to stay calm. I understand, Fatima. But I can't live in fear. I can't let jealousy stop me from being who I am." Fatima nodded, her eyes full of concern. "I know, dear. Just be careful. Trust your instincts." Amira left Fatima's house with a heavy heart but determined not to let fear control her life. She walked home slowly, enjoying the peaceful surroundings but also feeling a sense of unease she couldn't ignore. The fields, the trees, and the quiet paths that usually brought her comfort now seemed slightly ominous, as if hiding something she could not yet see. Back at home, her family greeted her warmly. Her mother had prepared a small meal, and her younger brother ran up to hug her. These moments reminded her why she kept moving forward despite the subtle tensions in the village. She sat with her family, laughed at small jokes, and shared stories from the market. For a while, she felt safe and normal again. That evening, as the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of purple and gold, Amira sat near her window and looked at the horizon. She thought about the day, the whispers, and Fatima's warning. She tried to focus on the good things, the love of her family, the beauty of the village, and her own courage. Yet deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change, something that would test her strength and bravery in ways she had never imagined. Amira went to bed that night with a mixture of hope and worry. She prayed quietly, asking for protection and strength. She didn't know it yet, but the events that were about to unfold would challenge everything she believed about trust, courage, and survival. The calm before the storm was ending, and soon, her life would take a turn no one could predict. Little did she know, the same villagers who smiled at her every day and thanked her for her kindness were hiding feelings of envy and suspicion. They would soon make a decision that would put her life in grave danger. But for now, the village slept peacefully under the moonlight, unaware of the darkness slowly approaching one of its brightest hearts. The next morning, Amira woke up feeling a little uneasy. The warning from Fatima still lingered in her mind. She tried to shake off the feeling, convincing herself that the village had always been safe and nothing bad would happen. She went about her routine, cleaning the house, feeding the animals, and preparing breakfast for her family. Everything seemed normal, yet there was a tension in the air that she could not ignore. Sometimes, in the quiet moments, she would glance out of the window and notice people staring at her with expressions that were hard to read. They smiled, but the smiles did not reach their eyes. That day, Amira had planned to visit a friend in the neighboring part of the village. She packed a small basket with fresh bread and vegetables as a gift. She wore her usual cheerful smile, hoping to hide any hint of worry from others. She walked along the familiar paths, greeting neighbors and exchanging pleasantries. Most people responded warmly, but there were a few who whispered to each other as she passed. Amira tried not to think about it. She told herself that jealousy and gossip were common everywhere, and there was no reason to fear. As she approached a small clearing near the edge of the village, Amira noticed something unusual. The path ahead seemed quieter than normal. Usually there were children playing, birds singing, and villagers tending to their daily work. But now there was a stillness that made her pause. Her instincts, which had rarely been wrong, sent a small alarm through her mind. She slowed her steps, looking around carefully. There were a few shadows moving between the trees, but she could not make out who they were. Before she could react, a group of people emerged from behind the trees. They were villagers she recognized, people she had known her entire life. Their expressions were serious, almost cold. They surrounded her quickly, blocking any way to escape. Amira's heart began to race. She tried to speak, to ask why they were acting this way, but her voice trembled and the words came out weak. "Amira, you must come with us," one of them said, his voice firm and unyielding. I don't understand," she replied, fear rising in her chest. "Why, what is happening?" "You know why," another villager said, stepping closer. "Everyone has been talking. You have brought trouble to the village, you must be punished." Amira's mind raced. Punished? She could not understand. She had never done anything to harm anyone. Her heart pounded in her chest, and she searched for a way to escape. She tried to reason with them, pleading, "Please, you are mistaken. I have done nothing wrong. Let me go, please." But her words fell on deaf ears. The villagers seemed determined and fear gripped her. She realized that talking would not help. They dragged her to a secluded area near the edge of the village, far from anyone who could see or hear. Amira struggled, trying to break free, but they were too many, and she was outnumbered. Then came the horrifying moment that would change her life forever. The villagers began to dig a small pit in the soft earth. Amira watched in disbelief as the ground was prepared. She could not understand how people she had known for years could do such a thing. Her hands shook, and tears streamed down her face. She screamed, begged, and cried, but it seemed no one was listening. Before she could fully comprehend what was happening, they forced her into the pit. The dirt was cold, rough, and heavy as they began to bury her up to her neck. Amira felt the weight pressing down on her body, suffocating her. She could barely move, barely breathe, and the panic threatened to overwhelm her. Her mind raced with thoughts of her family, her friends, and everything she loved. She could not believe that this was happening to her. As the dirt covered her shoulders and chest, she screamed for help. Her voice echoed in the small clearing, but the villagers stood silently, watching. Her mind went into overdrive, trying to find a way out. She thought about the animals she had cared for, the neighbors she had helped, and the life she had lived. She realized that giving up was not an option. She had to survive, no matter what. Amira tried to calm herself, focusing on her breathing. She felt the earth pressing against her, heavy and suffocating, but she refused to let fear take over completely. She remembered Fatima's warning and wondered if there was some chance someone might come for her. The thought gave her a tiny spark of hope. She shouted again, louder this time, praying that someone would hear her cries. The sun was high in the sky, and its warmth reached her face, but it offered little comfort. The pit was deep enough to hold her still, and the villagers were far enough to make rescue seem impossible. Amira's arms struggled against the weight of the soil, but she could barely move. Panic surged through her, and she felt tears mix with the dirt on her face. She whispered prayers, asking for strength, guidance, and protection. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as she remained trapped. Her body ached, her throat burned from shouting, and fear clawed at her mind. Yet, amidst the terror, she refused to let despair take her completely. She remembered all the moments in her life where she had faced challenges, no matter how small, and survived. She held on to that memory, repeating to herself that she would not die here, not yet. As she lay there, she noticed small movements in the surrounding trees. Shadows shifted, and she thought she heard voices. Her heart jumped. Could it be someone coming? She called out again, mustering all her remaining strength. The dirt around her neck pressed down heavily, making each word a struggle. But she kept shouting, hoping, believing that someone might respond. Inside her mind, she played back memories of her childhood, of her mother's warmth, her father's guidance, and the laughter of her younger brother. Each memory was like a shield, giving her courage and a reminder of why she had to survive. The fear was still there, but now it was mixed with determination. She refused to let the darkness win. As the day progressed, the sun began to dip toward the horizon. The shadows grew longer and the air cooled. Amira's body was exhausted, but she refused to stop trying. She shifted slightly, moving her arms to create small openings. Every movement was painful, but it allowed her to breathe a little easier. Her mind raced with strategies, trying to find any way to escape or signal for help. Amira's cries were heard faintly by a few passers-by, though they were too far to reach her immediately. Hope flickered inside her like a fragile flame. She kept shouting, calling out names, pleading for anyone to come. Her voice, though weak at times, carried the strength of her will. She refused to be silenced. Night began to fall and the village grew quiet. The fear inside her grew stronger as darkness enveloped the clearing. The pit seemed deeper in the fading light, and the air grew colder. Amira wrapped her arms around herself, trying to preserve warmth and comfort. She whispered to herself that this could not be the end. She was Amira, a girl who had survived challenges before, and she would survive this too. Her mind wandered to thoughts of Rashid, a young man from the village who had always been kind to her. She remembered his laughter, his gentle ways, and how he had once helped her carry heavy baskets from the market. She hoped with all her heart that if anyone could find her, it might be him. That thought gave her courage, a small but significant hope in the darkness. Amira stayed awake through the night, listening to the sounds of the village fading in the distance. She focused on her breathing, on every small movement that might help her survive. Each hour was a test of patience and endurance, a challenge to her physical and mental strength. Yet despite the terror, she did not give up. She clung to the hope that someone, somehow, would come for her. By the time the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees, Amira had endured the longest night of her life. Exhausted, aching, and frightened, she still refused to surrender. The world above her continued as if unaware of her struggle, and yet, somewhere beyond the clearing, fate was preparing to intervene. The events of that day would soon shift from despair to a test of courage, hope, and the strength of the human spirit. Even as she lay trapped, she made a silent promise to herself. She would survive. No matter what it took, she would not let this darkness claim her life. And deep down, she knew that someone who truly cared for her might hear her cries, someone who would not abandon her even when the world seemed against her. The stage was set for an incredible turn of events, a story of survival, courage, and the unexpected hero who would arrive when hope seemed lost. Amira, buried alive up to her neck, waited with fear, determination, and a flicker of faith that she might still be saved. Amira lay in the pit, the dirt pressing heavily against her chest and shoulders. Her body ached in every corner, her muscles tense from the unnatural position she had been forced into. Yet, even in the midst of pain and fear, her mind remained sharp. She knew that panic could be dangerous, and she needed to stay calm to survive. Her fingers brushed the soil in front of her, feeling the small stones and roots, each touch reminding her that she was still alive. That simple realization gave her a tiny spark of hope, enough to push her to keep trying. She closed her eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and began to assess her situation. She could not move freely, but she could shift slightly, wiggle her fingers, and use her arms to create small gaps. Every movement caused the soil to shift and make soft scraping sounds, but it was a risk she had to take. She began to experiment with different ways to free herself. At first, it was frustrating. The dirt was heavy, and her arms grew tired quickly. But slowly, inch by inch, she started to create a little more space around her neck and shoulders. Amira's mind was racing with thoughts. She remembered all the survival stories she had heard in her life, the times when people faced danger and overcame impossible odds. She told herself that she could do the same. "I will survive," she whispered, her voice hoarse but determined. "I will not die here. I am stronger than this moment. I can fight. I must fight." The words were more than a promise. They were a lifeline, a way to anchor her spirit in a situation that could easily overwhelm her. Hours passed, or maybe it was only minutes. Time had lost meaning in the pit. Every sound became magnified. The rustle of leaves, the chirping of distant birds, even the faint movement of soil above her became signals of hope or fear. Amira listened carefully, straining to hear any human voice that might indicate someone was nearby. Her own cries for help had weakened from exhaustion, but she continued to call, whispering in between deep, shaky breaths. The darkness of the night added to her fear. She could barely see the sky above, and the pit felt deeper and more confining as the stars blinked overhead. The cool night air brushed against her face, contrasting sharply with the heat of her body and the pressure of the dirt. She tried to stay still at times to conserve energy, then moved again when she sensed the soil might be loosened. Her mind kept replaying memories of her family, her mother's gentle voice, her father's laughter, and her brother's playful energy. Each memory reminded her of why she had to survive. Amira knew she could not rely solely on hope. She needed to think practically. She tested different ways to shift her body, experimenting with tiny movements that would not collapse the dirt entirely but might allow her to breathe more easily. Her fingers dug into the loose soil near her neck, creating small air pockets. She realized that even small gaps could make a big difference. With each little success, her confidence grew and a sense of control returned, however slight. While she worked to free herself, Amira also focused on her mental strength. Fear tried to take over, whispering that no one would come for her, that she might be left to die alone. But she refused to give in. She closed her eyes, imagined herself standing tall, walking back home and laughing with her family. She visualized Rashid, the kind young man from the village, finding her and helping her out of the pit. These images were more than comforting. They were fuel, keeping her mind focused and determined despite the pain and exhaustion. Amira's throat was dry, and her voice was raw from calling out for help. She realized she needed to conserve her strength. She began to call out less frequently but with more intention, hoping that someone who cared for her might hear even a single, desperate cry. She remembered that in every story of survival, patience was just as important as effort. She couldn't force rescue. She could only prepare herself for the moment it arrived. Time passed slowly, and the sun began to rise, casting faint light into the clearing. Amira could feel the change in the air, the warmth of the sun, the morning breeze, and the faint sounds of the village awakening nearby. She stretched her arms as much as possible, creating small shifts in the soil. The morning light brought a small sense of hope, reminding her that darkness would eventually pass, and with it, maybe help would arrive. In her mental state, Amira realized that survival was no longer just about escaping physically. It was about holding on to hope. She whispered prayers under her breath, thanking for the strength she still had and asking for guidance to endure the hours ahead. Each prayer gave her a renewed sense of determination. She told herself, "I will not be defeated. I will stay alive. I will fight every second until someone comes for me." As the morning grew brighter, Amira noticed subtle changes in the clearing. The soil above her shifted slightly in a way that suggested someone was approaching. Her heart leapt with cautious hope. Could it be a passerby? Or someone who had heard her cries? She kept her head still but strained her ears, listening for footsteps, voices, or any sign of life. Every small sound made her pulse race. She began to imagine what she would say if someone arrived. Would she be able to ask for help calmly? Could she guide them to dig carefully without causing harm? These thoughts gave her a sense of purpose. She realized that the moment someone did appear, she needed to act quickly and strategically. Her mind was racing, but in a focused, constructive way. Hours seemed to stretch endlessly. Amira's muscles ached, her back and shoulders screamed from the weight of the dirt, and exhaustion threatened to take over. But she refused to surrender. Every small movement she made was a victory, every shallow breath a testament to her determination. She imagined her family waking up, realizing she was missing and searching for her. The thought of them gave her courage. She had to survive for them as much as for herself. Amira tried to create noise without exhausting herself completely. She scraped the soil with her fingers and feet as much as possible, hoping that the vibrations might reach the surface. She called out names, her family, her friends, anyone who could hear her. She repeated Rashid's name softly, imagining that if he was nearby, he might hear and follow the sound. It was a long shot, but she had to try everything. As the day progressed, her body grew weaker, but her mind remained alert. She realized that survival was a combination of endurance, strategy, and hope. She focused on her breathing, moved carefully to avoid further pressure on her chest, and used every ounce of energy to signal for help in small ways. She refused to allow despair to paralyze her, refusing to give the darkness the victory it seemed to promise. Amira's struggle was not just physical, it was deeply emotional and mental. She fought waves of fear, loneliness, and doubt. But she also clung to memories of kindness, moments of happiness, and dreams of a future beyond the pit. These memories became her strength, a reminder that life was worth fighting for, and that someone might come for her when least expected. By late afternoon, Amira noticed faint signs of movement above her. The soil shifted slightly, more deliberately than before, as if someone was paying attention. Her heart raced. Could it be the person she had hoped for? Could it be the arrival of a savior she had imagined all this time? She prepared herself to respond, whispering softly and creating gentle vibrations in the soil, trying not to collapse the pit while signaling for help. The long hours of struggle had taught her patience, endurance, and the power of hope. Amira realized that even in the worst situations, the human spirit could survive if it refused to give up. She repeated to herself, "I am strong. I am alive. I will survive." Every word was a lifeline, binding her to the world above, connecting her to the possibility of rescue, and fueling her determination to endure whatever came next. Though she did not know it yet, someone had indeed heard her cries. Her hope, which had remained fragile but steadfast, was about to be rewarded. The next moments would bring her face to face with a life-changing event, the arrival of someone willing to risk everything to bring her back from the brink of death. But until that moment, Amira's struggle continued, a testament to courage, resilience, and the unyielding strength of a person refusing to surrender to despair. The morning sun shone brightly over the village, casting long shadows across the fields. While most of the village had begun its daily routines, Rashid, a young man known for his kindness and courage, had a strange feeling in his chest. It was a feeling he could not ignore, a quiet sense that something was wrong. He had been walking through the village, greeting neighbors and helping wherever he could, when he heard faint, almost imperceptible cries carried by the morning breeze. At first, he thought he might be imagining it. The sounds were faint, distant, and easily lost among the everyday noises of the village, cows lowing, children playing, and the occasional hammer striking wood. But the calls grew slightly clearer as he walked toward the edge of the village. They were weak, desperate, but unmistakably human. Rashid's heart skipped a beat. He paused, listening carefully. "Amira," he whispered instinctively, though he did not know why that name had come to mind. His mind raced, remembering the girl who was kind to everyone, always smiling, always helping, and whom he had known for years. The cries grew stronger as Rashid moved closer to a small clearing near the edge of the village. He noticed that the ground was disturbed, the soil loose in a way that suggested recent digging. Something about the scene felt wrong, almost sinister. Instinct told him to be cautious, but his heart urged him forward. He ran the last few steps, adrenaline pumping through his veins until he saw a horrifying sight. Amira, trapped in a pit, her body buried up to her neck in dirt, struggling to breathe. Rashid froze for a moment, the image almost too shocking to process. The sight of someone he cared about, someone so full of life, trapped and in danger, ignited a fierce determination in him. He dropped to his knees, calling out her name. "Amira, hold on, I'm here, I'll get you out." His voice was firm, urgent, but also filled with hope. Amira's eyes widened as she heard his voice. In the hours of struggle and fear, she had clung to the hope that someone, anyone, would come. Now her hope became reality. She tried to respond, her voice weak and hoarse, but she managed a trembling, "Rashid, help please." Rashid quickly assessed the situation. The pit was deep enough to trap her body, and the surrounding soil was loose but heavy. He knew that if he did not act carefully, he could accidentally harm her. He rolled up his sleeves, gritted his teeth, and began to dig. The work was exhausting, the soil heavy, and the task more difficult than he had imagined. Every handful of dirt removed required careful attention, not only to move it efficiently, but also to ensure Amira was not further buried or hurt in the process. Amira watched him with a mixture of relief and terror. Every movement of Rashid brought her hope, but she still feared that something could go wrong. The weight pressing against her chest and shoulders made it hard to breathe, and exhaustion made every second feel longer. But seeing him there, working tirelessly, gave her the courage to keep trying. She shifted slightly when possible, creating tiny spaces to make the digging easier and to breathe more freely. The sun climbed higher, and Rashid did not relent. Sweat ran down his face and soaked his clothes, but he kept going. He could feel the panic in her eyes even though she could barely speak. He whispered encouragements as he worked. "Just hold on, Amira. I won't let anything happen to you. You're going to be okay. I promise." His voice carried determination, care, and reassurance, helping her feel a little stronger, a little more hopeful with every passing moment. The process was slow, painstaking, and physically exhausting. The dirt was heavy, and the sides of the pit sometimes shifted, threatening to collapse. Rashid had to stop frequently, adjusting his approach, shoring up the edges of the pit with his hands, and sometimes using a stick to gently loosen the soil around her neck and shoulders. Amira encouraged him softly, whispering instructions whenever she could move. Their teamwork, though improvised, was precise, guided by instinct, determination, and trust. Hours passed, yet Rashid did not waver. He thought about her life, her courage, and her kindness to the village. Every detail of her character fueled his determination. He could not leave her here. He refused to consider the possibility of failure. His mind focused entirely on one goal, to save her, no matter the cost. Amira, despite her exhaustion, remained mentally alert. She focused on following his guidance, moving her arms and shoulders as instructed, creating small openings and shifts in the soil to make his work easier. The pit, which had seemed like a tomb, slowly began to feel like a temporary obstacle that could be overcome. Every movement of Rashid, every bit of dirt removed, renewed her spirit and gave her a reason to hold on. As the afternoon sun began to descend, Rashid finally reached the point where he could support her upper body. Carefully, he held her shoulders and encouraged her to lift herself slightly while he dug beneath her arms and chest. It was the most delicate part of the rescue. One wrong move could hurt her, or the soil could collapse. But Rashid's steady hands, combined with Amira's cautious movements, allowed them to inch closer to freedom. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Rashid managed to clear enough soil for Amira to pull herself out. Exhausted, covered in dirt, and trembling, she emerged from the pit. She collapsed into his arms, crying, laughing, and shaking all at once. The weight of fear, pain, and relief collided, leaving her physically weak but emotionally relieved. Rashid held her tightly, whispering reassurances and helping her steady herself. For a moment, neither spoke. The air was filled with their shared relief, the rustling of leaves and the distant sounds of the village. Amira's body ached. Her clothes were torn and dirty, but she was alive. Rashid, equally exhausted, smiled faintly through his own dirt-covered face, knowing that he had accomplished what mattered most. She was safe. As Amira regained her strength, she looked around at the clearing. The pit, the dirt, and the shadows reminded her of the danger she had faced, but Rashid's presence transformed fear into gratitude. She whispered softly, "Thank you, I thought no one would come." Rashid shook his head, smiling gently. "I told you I wouldn't leave you. You're stronger than you know, Amira. You held on and you fought. That's why you're still here, and I'll make sure you're safe from now on." The two of them began the slow walk back to the village. Rashid supported her, helping her take careful steps, while Amira clung to him for balance and reassurance. Along the way, she recounted moments from her ordeal, though her voice faltered at times. Rashid listened silently, offering comfort without judgment, understanding the magnitude of what she had endured. By the time they reached the edge of the village, the news had begun to spread. Villagers gathered, their expressions a mix of shock, guilt, and relief. Some had participated in her burial, while others had remained silent witnesses. Rashid stood protectively beside Amira, ensuring that she was not overwhelmed or questioned too harshly. She was alive, and that was what mattered most. Once back home, Amira's family rushed to her side. Tears flowed freely as they embraced her, relieved that their beloved daughter and sister had survived such a terrifying ordeal. Her younger brother held her hand tightly, afraid to let go, while her mother clutched her face gently, whispering prayers of gratitude. Her father's eyes were filled with pride and relief, though there was a shadow of anger at the villagers who had caused such suffering. Amira, exhausted but safe, realized that her life had been saved by courage, determination, and the kindness of someone who refused to give up. Rashid's bravery and quick action had turned a moment of near death into a triumph of human compassion. In that moment, Amira understood the power of hope, trust, and the bond between people who care for each other. The village itself would never forget that day. The story of Amira's survival spread quickly, becoming a tale of courage, resilience, and the triumph of good over ignorance. Rashid became a hero, not just for his physical bravery, but for his loyalty, his quick thinking, and his refusal to abandon someone in need. Amira's life, forever changed by the experience, became a symbol of hope and determination for everyone who heard her story. Though the fear and trauma would take time to fade, Amira knew that she had endured the worst and survived. She had faced death, darkness, and despair, and emerged stronger. And she had learned in the most dramatic way possible that even in the darkest moments, there is hope, and there are people willing to fight for those we love. After the terrifying ordeal, Amira returned home with Rashid by her side, her body still trembling from exhaustion, her clothes torn and stained with dirt. Her family embraced her, holding her tightly as though afraid that letting go would make her disappear. The warmth of their arms and the soft murmurs of relief brought tears to her eyes. She had survived a nightmare that no one could imagine, and yet here she was, alive, breathing, and surrounded by the people who loved her most. The first few days were the hardest. Amira's body was sore, bruised, and weak from being trapped for so long. Every movement reminded her of the weight of the soil that had held her down. Her muscles ached, her back throbbed, and simple tasks like walking or eating required great effort. Yet amidst the physical pain, there was also a deeper struggle, an emotional weight that pressed on her heart. She could not forget the fear, the helplessness, and the moments when she thought her life had ended. Her family did everything they could to help her recover. Her mother prepared nourishing meals. Her father encouraged her to rest and take small walks, and her brother stayed by her side constantly, holding her hand or simply sitting near her so she would not feel alone. Rashid also visited every day, making sure she was comfortable, bringing fresh clothes and sometimes just sitting quietly, allowing her to speak or not speak, depending on what she needed. His presence was a source of immense comfort, a reminder that she was no longer alone and that someone cared deeply for her survival and well-being. Amira's emotional recovery was gradual. At first, she felt haunted by the memory of being buried alive. Every sound, the wind rustling through the trees, the distant barking of dogs, or even a simple creak in the house, triggered a flicker of fear. Sleep came slowly, often accompanied by nightmares that forced her to relive the terror. Each time she would wake up gasping, her heart racing, and it would take hours before she could calm herself enough to sleep again. But over time, with the support of her family and Rashid, these moments grew less frequent. She learned to breathe deeply, remind herself of her survival, and focus on the reality that she was safe now. The village, too, began to change after the incident. News of Amira's survival spread quickly, leaving many in shock and shame. Those who had participated in burying her or had silently watched faced the consequences of their actions. Some apologized, though it was unclear whether their remorse was sincere or born of fear. The local authorities became involved, ensuring that such acts of superstition and violence would not happen again. Amira's courage had not only saved herself, but had also awakened the community to the importance of justice, compassion, and the dangers of blind ignorance. As she regained strength, Amira began to venture out of her home more often. She walked slowly at first, accompanied by her family or Rashid, enjoying the sunlight and the familiar paths of her village. Each step was a small victory, a reminder that life was still hers to live. The fields, the trees, and the market, which had once felt threatening in the shadows of her ordeal, now seemed full of life and promise. She greeted neighbors cautiously at first, uncertain how they would respond, but many showed kindness and support, acknowledging the bravery and resilience she had shown. Rashid remained a constant presence, though never intrusive. He helped her walk, shared quiet conversations, and listened whenever she needed to speak about her feelings. Their bond grew stronger through this shared experience. She trusted him deeply, not just for saving her life, but for understanding her pain and being patient with her recovery. Slowly, she found comfort in his presence, knowing that she could lean on someone without feeling weak or dependent. The emotional healing took as much effort as the physical recovery. Amira spent hours reflecting on the experience, processing the fear, betrayal, and terror she had faced. She also thought about the lessons it had taught her, the fragility of life, the strength of human courage, and the importance of hope even in the darkest moments. Writing in a journal, speaking to her family, and quietly meditating became ways for her to release some of the lingering trauma. She began to see herself not just as a victim, but as a survivor, a person who had endured a trial that few could imagine and had emerged stronger. One afternoon, while sitting under the shade of a large tree near her home, Amira shared her thoughts with Rashid. "I never imagined something like this could happen," she said softly, her voice calm but reflective. "And yet here I am, alive. It makes me realize life is fragile, but it's also precious. I have so much to be grateful for." Rashid nodded, understanding deeply. "You are stronger than anyone could imagine, Amira. You held on when it seemed impossible. And you taught everyone around you something important, how courage, hope, and determination can survive even in the worst situations." Amira smiled faintly, the warmth in her heart growing. She knew that she had not only survived physically, but had also discovered an inner strength that would remain with her forever. Her fear had transformed into courage, her despair into resilience, and her pain into wisdom. As weeks turned into months, Amira slowly resumed more of her normal activities. She visited the market again, helped neighbors with their work, and even began to share her story carefully to educate others. She spoke about the dangers of superstition, the importance of compassion, and the power of hope. People listened attentively, inspired by her bravery and determination. Many villagers began to reflect on their own actions and attitudes, realizing that fear and jealousy could lead to terrible consequences if unchecked. Rashid and Amira's friendship deepened into a relationship built on trust, respect, and mutual care. He had been her savior, but more importantly, he became a steady presence in her life, someone she could rely on emotionally, mentally, and socially. Their bond was not just about gratitude, it was about shared experiences, understanding, and the recognition of courage and resilience in one another. Her family, proud of her recovery, supported her in every way possible. They celebrated small victories: the first time she walked without assistance, the first night she slept peacefully, the first meal she cooked after her ordeal. These moments, simple as they were, became milestones of her recovery, proof that life could continue and even flourish after tragedy. Through the recovery process, Amira also forgave herself for the feelings of fear and weakness she had experienced. She realized that surviving such an ordeal was not about never being afraid, but about finding the courage to endure despite fear. She learned that true strength came from persistence, hope, and the willingness to fight even when the odds seemed impossible. The village, now more aware and cautious, became a safer place. Superstitions that had once influenced cruel decisions began to fade, replaced by understanding, dialogue, and respect. Amira's story became a lesson for everyone, a reminder that life is precious, and every person deserves compassion, fairness, and protection. One evening, as Amira sat with her family and Rashid under the glowing sunset, she reflected on everything that had happened. The fear, the despair, the near-death experience, and finally the rescue and recovery. All had shaped her into a person stronger, wiser, and more compassionate than she had ever been. She looked at Rashid and her family and realized that their love, support, and courage had been just as vital as her own determination. Amira whispered softly, almost to herself, "I survived. I faced darkness and came out stronger. And I will use my life to make a difference, to spread hope, and to protect others from what I went through." Her words were a quiet promise, a reflection of the journey she had endured and the resilience she had discovered within herself. In the months and years that followed, Amira became a symbol of courage in her village. People admired her not just for surviving, but for the grace and strength she demonstrated afterward. She inspired others to face challenges with hope, to act with kindness, and to never lose faith in themselves, even when circumstances seemed impossible. The bond between Rashid and Amira grew stronger with time, rooted in trust, shared experience, and respect. Together they helped others, guided by the lessons learned from Amira's ordeal. Her story was told to children and adults alike, not as a tale of fear, but as a testament to the human spirit, the power of courage, hope, and resilience in the face of unimaginable adversity. Amira's life, forever changed by the terrifying event, was now filled with gratitude, purpose, and love. She had survived the impossible, faced her deepest fears, and discovered a strength she had never known existed. And though the memory of that day would always remain, it no longer held her captive. Instead, it became a source of inspiration, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, life can prevail, hope can shine, and courage can triumph over fear. Amira looked around her village one bright morning, feeling the warmth of the sun, the gentle breeze, and the laughter of people living their daily lives. She realized that life was a gift, fragile yet resilient, terrifying yet beautiful. She smiled, her heart full, knowing that she had faced the unimaginable and emerged stronger, wiser, and ready to embrace whatever the future held.